let you take it away now.
Well, welcome everybody. You're at Assume Trauma is in the Room workshop. And we have three presenters today, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. They would like to do that, so I'll give you the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I know it's late in the day, and we're very excited and honored to be part of your professional development day. My name is Shannon O'Neill. I am a co-founder of TLE Wellness Center, TLE standing for the lived experience. It's something that Justine, Julie, and I practice and use every day in our professional realms. In fact, Justine even wrote her master's thesis on the lived experience. It has made me a better practitioner, better mediator. And there, it's not something that we're covering today, but if anybody is curious about how to use the lived experience in their practice, please reach out. It's something that we love talking about, and using the wisdom of the lived experience in our practice. I collaborate very often with Justine and with Julie in our practice. I think that and I believe that the therapeutic skills and tools that Julie and Justine have passed along to me have made me more equipped with emotions and behaviors in a mediation setting. They have made me a better mediator. And I think with confidence, I can say that the knowledge that I have with regards to conflict has made them better therapists. But they can say yes or no to that. Justine?
Yeah, I would certainly say that. So I'm a registered psychotherapist, a registered social worker, and certainly I would say the tools and knowledge that Shannon as a mediator has given me and empowered me to name conflict. Before, I think I would really kind of in a roundabout way, hey, how can we use a skill to bring the conflict down and take the edge off of the conflict? Versus the confidence of naming that it's there and approaching it in a more skilled way. So we really do collaborate across discipline in our practice. Specifically, just to introduce myself, as I said, I'm a social worker. I practice individual and family therapy from what we call a dialectical behavior therapy approach, a DBT approach. Specifically, most recently, I have trained in providing trauma therapy from a DBT approach to folks who struggle with what we call emotion dysregulation. So big emotion, and in the extreme can be diagnosed as borderline personality disorder. So I do a whole bunch of different things. Really excited to be here. I will explain in my part of the presentation what trauma is, giving you some confidence and competence to understand when you're in the room with trauma survivors in a mediation context. Julie?
And I'm Julie Hansen. I am also a registered social worker. I have 15 plus experience working in a variety of different settings, from community mental health and hospitals, in schools, the school system, as well as professional environments. I work with individuals and families doing individual and family therapy. I work with teams and organizations doing team building and education. So yeah, I do direct practice therapy. I do organizational development, training, and teaching as well. For my section of the presentation, my intention is to leave you with a tool that you will have practiced, that you can use tomorrow with your clients, that will be able to, that'll help you be more effective when trauma or an emotion takes over in the room and you're like, I'm not sure what to do with this. My hope is that after our time together, you will have a little bit more confidence around that. So we'll go to the next slide.
I just wanted to remind everybody, they're happy if you would like to ask questions as they go along. So I guess just put your hand up on your screen and they'll know that you want to ask a question. Thanks.
So yeah, just the next slide whenever you get a chance.
And while the next slide's coming, we are hoping to have some dialogue, so have some conversation throughout. So hopefully you can bring your ideas and your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so today, the aim is, and this is what we'll be walking away with, is a clear understanding of what trauma-informed practice looks like and of trauma and its sources, a concrete skill to stay effective when trauma is in the room. This is going to be under the validation, under the concept of validation. We're going to do some practicing, application, and troubleshooting, and we're going to all leave with an increased confidence and competence in addressing trauma and trauma responses. Next slide, please. So the ADRO defines trauma-informed practices as the following: awareness of trauma impact, creating a safe space, empowering individuals, active listening and validation, and collaboration with professionals. Today, we are going to focus on the awareness of trauma impact and a validation skill, because oftentimes we think that we understand what validation is, and it seems like a very simple concept, yet it can be done very, very, very wrong. And so this skill that we have, validation skill, which is a therapeutic skill, but as Julie and Justine will both attest to, it's a human to human skill. It's a connecting skill. Anybody can use it, and it will make you a better practitioner. Okay, next slide, please. So when we are all trauma informed, and we all do trauma informed work, in our practices, and these are what our principles are. We always assume that there's trauma in the room. We're all very familiar with the definition of trauma. We know what trauma responses look like and sound like in conflict, and we have skills to be able to support our clients through those moments. And we are aware of our own, having the lived experience, our own traumatic responses, and we know how to take care of ourselves in those moments. So we'll talk a little bit about that for the practitioner as well as the client. Next slide, please. So we get to start. What is trauma, Justine?
Okay, so I think when we hear the word trauma, our nervous systems know what this is, right? It can feel like a heavy concept. Our body, even as I just say the word trauma, it's like, oh, whoa, what are we getting into? In order to make it less of a cumbersome topic, we need to know what it is. Our bodies know what it is, but in a clinical setting, how can we define it? What is it? And being able to define it as such is being a trauma-informed practitioner. So what is it? Defining trauma. A trauma is an event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope or to integrate the ideas and emotions involved in that experience. What does that mean? In essence, it's something big that happens to an individual, something that feels really challenging and activates a lot of emotions. But the key here is that it's not the event itself, it's what happens next. It's the felt sense of that individual of being unable to cope with something that's happened. So again, not the event, but that felt sense of being unable to cope. So think, for example, if we have a tornado pass through, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. But if we've got an underground shelter, let's say we have a basement to go to, Julie brings a card deck, Shannon brings a boom box if you're from that time, and we listen to some music. It's fine. It doesn't have to be traumatic. Let's say, however, you don't have this shelter. Let's say you're holding onto the door frame. You don't know whether your house is going to be blown down. The fear sets in. It's not the event itself. Do I have the resources to cope in that moment? That's the first thing. The second piece, if we could go back just, yep, we're going to stay on this slide. Thank you for just a quick moment. The second piece is that just because we experience a trauma doesn't mean that we are traumatized, okay? The key piece, as you'll see in this definition, is the ability to integrate the ideas and the emotions of that experience, meaning two people can experience this traumatic event, okay? One can have gone through the tornado. All three of us are in the basement. Let's say Shannon, though, next week, nightmares, flashbacks. Every time the wind blows, maybe Shannon gets panicked. Versus maybe I, on the other hand, yeah, it happened. It wasn't, it was difficult, but I'm able to move on. Now for Shannon, what's gone on maybe is the inability to remember and recall that experience without overwhelm or underwhelm. So let's say she remembers, hey, that happened last weekend, but as she's telling me that story, hyperventilation, panic, or maybe she goes, you know what, it was fine. Don't worry about it. I lost my whole house, but it's okay. Didn't matter. We kind of downplay and deny the significance. If I can't acknowledge what happened and let in that emotional experience without getting overwhelmed or underwhelmed, then what happens is those emotions attached to the trauma get stuck. That's when we develop what we would traditionally call post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD symptoms. Those emotions get stuck when I recall the experience. That's when I start having impacts on my mental health. Maybe I'm irritable. Maybe I'm struggling with depression, anxiety. Perhaps I've got more of a startle response. Anytime I turn on the news, and even when I go on the Weather Channel now, I have this response. Okay. So it's, do I have the ability to cope, the resources, and am I able to meaningfully process the emotions involved in that experience? And if not, that's a trauma. Wonderful. Next slide, please. Okay. What are the components of a trauma? How do you know one has happened to you or to a client with whom you're working in the moment? There are three pieces, or the anatomy of a trauma, three things that you have to have. The first is that it's unexpected. Meaning, so for example, perhaps you have a loved one who passes away of old age. It's expected, right? Perhaps you've got a will, first will and testament. Perhaps you have a wake set up. Everyone is expecting it to happen. Versus maybe you have a loved one who passes away too soon. You get overwhelmed. You can't see it coming. Unexpected. The second is you're unprepared. So think COVID as an example. There was a few scientists, there's a bit of chatter about, as a global community, a pandemic could happen given what's going on. However, our healthcare system was woefully unprepared, at least in Toronto, in this part of the world of where we're at, and in Canada. And so that being unprepared was very traumatic for a lot of families that I practice family therapy with. Young people being so disconnected from each other during really crucial developmental years, that wholly unprepared for that. And so that was highly traumatic. The last crucial piece of a trauma is that the person has this felt sense of being out of control. They couldn't stop it from happening. The emotions involved in that, helplessness and powerlessness. I couldn't control what was happening to me. So think things like car crash. So these three components are important in order to identify that a trauma has happened. Wonderful. Next slide, if you will. Thank you, Marian. So trauma is in the eye of the beholder, meaning really what's important to understand is because trauma happens, or the definition of a trauma is really the inability to cope. The inability to cope is really quite subjective, right? The things and the resources that I have might not be what Shannon or Julie has. And so if that's the case, that felt sense of being unable to cope and process the emotions is really highly subjective. And because it is so highly subjective, here's the title of our presentation, we assume it's there. Before a client walks in, I'm assuming that that individual may have experienced something that's traumatic because it's so highly subjective. I'm also assuming that I've had experiences as a person of lived experience walking into that space, and that my nervous system may feel some of the impacts of what's happening in that space, and attending to my own nervous system when I walk in. It's there generally. Oh, we're going to give you some skills and tools. So it's not overly overwhelming. We're not opening Pandora's box. How do we skillfully and competently address it? There are three things, it's not exhaustive, three things that I'm highlighting that contribute to whether someone may perceive something as traumatic. Temperament. In other words, what is someone's emotional baseline, right? I like to use this example of a dandelion versus an orchid. Some individuals are just a little more sensitive than others of their emotional makeup. Not a judgment, not a weakness. It is. It is the way that their biological vulnerabilities exist. So if an orchid, think orchid, someone who just needs a bit of particular sunlight, a little more watering, that sort of thing, versus a dandelion who, doesn't matter. They don't need any fertilizer. They can proliferate. And so for someone who's more of an orchid that has that more up and down sort of emotional baseline, then a trauma might be, or anything that happens to them might feel a bit bigger. They may have a more difficult time, and therefore something might be perceived as a trauma that the clinician or the practitioner may not name at first glance. Vulnerabilities. What's going on that day? Did you have 5 sessions or mediations before walking into this next client? What went on for that person during the day? Do they typically like an evening appointment and you had to fit them in the morning? Are there physiological stressors like lack of sleep, health concerns, past individual history of trauma? The more trauma someone has experienced, the more likely they are to perceive something in the moment as traumatic. Lastly, this third point is crucial. Does the person have support to deal with something challenging? Again, something that is a trauma doesn't have to be traumatizing. Do they have someone to help them process the emotions that happen with those difficult events? So this can look like community. Do I have a supportive community around me? Does my culture have larger systemic support, right? Am I going to be welcomed if I walk into a therapy office? If I have a different worldview in terms of mental health, maybe I don't subscribe to the medicalization of mental health and I use more spiritual practices. Will that be welcomed? If not, that can be perceived as a trauma. Systemic concerns, perhaps if you're calling emergency services, are you a person of color? Calling police is not a benign event in that case. Understanding that support after an event or lack thereof is going to increase the likelihood that something feels like a trauma. Wonderful. If I could have the next slide, if that's okay. And then the next one. Perfect. Okay. So sources of trauma and types of trauma. Now, the reason we're sharing this with you is because when we think of trauma, we know the big ticket items, right? Natural disaster, that sort of thing, things that happen to the individual trauma. There are less obvious things. And when someone is walking into the room, we want to be able to name and hopefully kind of screen for different sources of trauma that might not be so obvious to us. You might see this in the chart before if you have information about the client from the referral. System trauma. Is this person, for example, involved in the child welfare system, in the CAS system, as we would say in Toronto? Are they here of their own volition? If not, are they unprepared? Was it unexpected? Do they feel like they can cope? Do they feel like they have no control? Often not when CAS system is involved. Same thing with the justice system. Do I have any perceived control? Likely not. Also understanding that as the practitioner, as the therapist, we are part of the system. As an example, I had a client who was a ward of the Crown from a very young age. And I didn't quite clue in right in the beginning that obviously as a social worker, I am not benign. This person has had a lot of poor experiences with being removed from home from quite a young age. I am not a benign actor, as much as I'd like to think so, right? Understanding that when we're engaging. A diagnostic trauma, actually studies show that right after a mental health diagnosis, unfortunately, thoughts of suicide increase. Understanding that that can be a really difficult experience. Conflict itself, and thank you, Shannon, has given me a lot of education around this. Have I had experiences where I've successfully resolved conflict with people. If not, then it's going to feel like I can't cope. Definition of trauma. Intergenerational trauma. Have there been patterns of coping from generation to generation that we see? Understanding that when we're working with a client, we're working with the latest iteration within that family system. And I want to be really clear here. We're not talking about passing pathology from generation to generation as if there's something wrong with that family. No, we're talking about patterns of coping that have been learned and also that exists within a wider system, and trauma that comes from systemic sources as well. Chronic invalidation. This one is key. I find that when I'm working with family, to be honest, it's not typically these larger big ticket items like abuse, but actually chronic invalidation, meaning young person or one person in the family simply feels as though their family members don't understand them and haven't for many, many years often. So that might look like, hey, I have something to tell you. I had a hard day. Yeah, but you can, it's not a big deal. Let's talk about something else. Let's have dinner, that sort of thing. And if that happens enough, that person can feel really misunderstood, that they don't belong. And then we get this really insidious trauma and trauma responses. Vicarious trauma, this is the professional trauma that we receive. So focusing on the practitioner when we show up in the space. Having listened to stories of trauma, we offer a bit more information. I'm glossing over this right now at the TLE Wellness Center and trainings around this, but understanding that we're not precluded from experiencing trauma as a result of this type of work that we do. There are also types of trauma to look out for. I'm going to do this briefly for sake of time. Big T traumas, little t traumas. This is therapy jargon for, I'm going to pull from what Shannon said to me the other day, which is big T traumas, the things that make the news. Little t traumas are things that happen in our living rooms, meaning big T traumas really are, they can be things that compromise safety, right? Natural disaster, sexual assault, these big things, versus little t traumas are the repeated chronic things that happen to somebody over their lifetime. Emotional neglect, chronic bullying, these things that don't register sometimes to us as trauma, but really are just as impactful. The last one is complex trauma, which is something that I work with survivors quite a bit. Complex trauma are things that happen to people usually in their early development that happen repeatedly over time. Chronic invalidation, yes, some abuse. And why it's complex is because things that happen at an individual's development, at early developmental periods, affect the way they see the world. Are people inherently trustworthy or inherently untrustworthy? Am I inherently lovable or unlovable, given the traumas I experience? Suffice it to say, these are the things we're looking for that might not be so evident when we're walking into the room, just to be able to name and keep an eye out for when we're working with clients. Could I have the next slide? Wonderful. Okay. So we now know what to look out for, but how do we know when trauma is leading the interaction and leading the space between mediator and client or therapist and client? This is how we know. 4 things will happen. All designed, these are full nervous system responses, all designed to protect the individual. They are involuntary when the individual perceives a threat in the space. Fight, becoming aggressive, so the nervous system, think mama bear, gearing up to protect herself and her cubs. Flight, I'm getting the heck out of there to get away from the threat. Freeze, shut down. I call this like a feigned death response or like a natural anesthetic. The nervous system completely shuts down. It's almost like nothing, I can't feel anything, I can't get hurt. Fawn is pleasing and appeasing. It's important to understand that the trauma survivor in the moment, when there's something that happens in the space that reminds them of something that has happened in the past, often the individual kind of loses sense of time. They feel very much like the thing that's happening in the session is very much reminding them of the past without sort of awareness. So for instance, I'll give this quick example. Often you'll have a couple, perhaps one of the partners has had a history of chronic invalidation from a caregiver. And then you're in a session trying to get some agreement from parties, and the other partner's invalidating. Nah, I don't see it that way. Or no, like let's argue over what the truth was of the matter. Partner who's had this trauma history of neglectful caregivers, unintentionally, of course, might feel like that threat is present. They still feel just as vulnerable and unsafe as they did when they were quite young without their awareness. And so they might engage in these trauma responses in order to protect themselves. If the client's response in the moment is disproportionate to the event, if you feel like the client's overreacting, think trauma response. Okay, and I'm going to pass it over to Shannon here.
So you can see the trauma. Sorry, I'm in conflict with my dogs right now. Okay, hopefully that worked. I just directed them. So we can see very similar the trauma responses in with the 5 responses of conflict, which I'm sure most people are familiar with, the Merrill and Reed. So directing is so much like fight, right? It looks like winning at all costs, displaying anger, slamming doors, feeling out of control, making big body movements, avoiding, right? It's the like looks like shutdown, looks like sometimes it looks like silence, which is really hard when everybody's being silent. And then we have harmonizing, which is fawn, right? And it looks like agreement. It looks like people pleasing. It looks like deferring to another. It looks like somebody being very self-critical, hiding emotions, going along and denying opinions, needs and feelings, their own. All of those responses are so intimately tied to our trauma responses. And what's interesting about that is that when we are in those places, there is no space to really have a good faith discussion because it's focused on self-protection. It's not focused on meeting everybody's needs and collaborating. And so we just are bringing this slide up so that when you see these behaviors in your work, that you're able to identify it as this person feels unsafe right now, or they're perceiving themselves to be unsafe. And neither one of these behaviors are right or wrong or bad or good. They are all self-protective. And so if we go to the next slide, we see that those are the way it looks like. This is the way it sounds like if you're in a space with somebody that's in any one of these responses. I can do directing really well. And because it tends to be something that I lean on when I'm feeling unsafe, especially if I know I'm right, which I am all the time, especially in this stance. So it sounds like no, always, never. They're a liar, character assassinations about the other person. We hear a lot of like gaslighting. They're a narcissist. These are things that come out a lot when somebody is in the directing stance. If somebody's in the avoiding stance, it sounds like I can't do this, I need to leave, silence, or it's really hard even to get them to come into and make an appointment or show up for the session. When you're in the harmonizing or the fawn, it's going to sound like this is my fault, I'm not good at this, give them whatever they want, I don't do conflict. So again, none of these are bad or wrong or good. They're all self-protective. And as we know from the social studies study, that we can move through them as well. And so, yeah, like I said, I tend to lean a lot on directing if I feel like I'm right. But if I feel that somebody else is more powerful or has more experience or has more knowledge than I do, I tend to be more of a fawner or an avoider. How about you two, Julie and Justine? Where do you fall?
Ooh, I would say I'm a bit of a combo pack. If somebody's coming at me and is leaning into the directive, someone who's super logic based and all the facts, and I'm going to tell you, I go straight to fawn, or or I avoid. I want to get the heck out of there. I will either totally agree with you, yeah, you're right, yep, or I'm going to leave as soon as I possibly can. The other thing that happens to me is when somebody comes in just spilling out emotions all over the place, it brings out the director in me. Like I get very, I wanna stop it right away. That's my fight. I want to make that stop. I want to make it go away. So it's, yeah, I do a little bit of both. How about you, Justine?
I like the combo pack.
Yeah.
So we're all a bunch of combo packs.
Yeah.
So, getting a bit more vulnerable, I practice family therapy because I've had a lot of family members who have struggled with dysregulation. And so I struggle when I see parents who are struggling to be emotionally attuned or validating. And I want to say, for those who know this reference, listen, Linda, this is how you do it. I get, I think, really directing. And if I start to feel really overwhelmed with it and I feel like I'm not getting anywhere, I'm an avoider. I don't want to do this. That's my go-tos.
Okay, next slide, please. So we wanted to put it out to everybody here, just if anybody wants to share a little bit, like, where do you see yourself on that graph? Like, how do you show up when you might feel or you're perceiving yourself to be unsafe in a session or in an appointment?
Which inevitably happens.
Yeah.
For the best of us at the best of times and the worst of times. These parts of us show up.
Oh, we got
We've got
Got it in the
fight.
comments, fight.
Okay, yeah, we got some good. We're not the only directors in the room. Oh, and you can go back and go back to the show because people are saying that they want to think. We've got some director or fawn, fight and fawn.
Yeah.
Got some freeze. We've got some more fight. Yeah.
We got a lot of fighters.
Great, great.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, and
Depends
okay, fight
circumstances,
or
yeah.
flight depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And dare we ask also, what is it that brings out those things in you? Are there a typical situation, a key phrase? What is it that brings that out in you? Like I said, the super logic, I know what's right and wrong, like that just makes me want to, ooh. And people can unmute if they want, or post in the chat, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Emotionally vulnerable situations.
Belligerence, yes.
Yeah. Belligerence makes me, yeah.
When
Yeah,
time is
time is
short,
short,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me want to, yeah, that stresses me out too. And I can feel it in my body, right? Like it starts with this
Right.
tensing. Sometimes the fight or the conflict isn't worth it. Avoidance. I love seeing the self-awareness and the like being willing to look at our vulnerabilities and how we show up as imperfect humans with our own nervous systems in these interactions. Such a key ingredient.
Okay. So keeping in mind that it's not just us or not just our clients that are showing up with these responses, it's us as well. And again, it depends on the situation. Absolutely. Just being aware that in the space and any kind of interaction, most likely someone is going to perceive themselves as being unsafe, and you are going to see these behaviors show up. Whether they stay there or not, but they are going to show up. Okay, next slide after this one.
So quick tips. What happens? Because as you so vulnerably shared, thank you for taking my shame down for sharing some of yours. Um, there are some quick things that we can do. Now, this is very brief. If you're interested in hearing more, we do offer workshops around how do we do this in more detail. Quickly, your breath is always with you. It is really regulating for the nervous system. Everybody has one breath, a moment to pause, take a breath. Feet on the floor, very tactile for the nervous system. Yeah, feet on the floor, even hands on the desk, right? Like I'm safe here. The world is safe. At least there's a chair under me. Take a sip of cold water. There's some science around why cold in particular is really quite regulating when the nervous system perceives threat. I'm not going to go into it right now, but cold water. Something to fidget with. We had this like thing on the fidget spinners, if you've got that, or even a pen. Something to direct to get that more of that nervous energy out, or that fear that your body's experiencing. Move your body. Often if we're directing, we want to lean in and say, hey, I've got something to tell you. So move your body. Get some space. Take a break, right? Nobody said just because you're the practitioner, you're not allowed a minute. In fact, showing a client that it is okay to take a moment is okay. This is setting the table. This is setting the stage for trauma-informed practice. Putting these things in order before walking into the room is a trauma-informed way of approaching our clients and ourselves. Perfect. And then we can do next slide.
Okay, no, not yet,
Oh,
not yet.
sorry.
Let's go back because we're gonna pause here and we're just gonna take a moment in the spirit of getting in the habit of taking a little moment to regulate ourselves throughout the day in various moments. And so we're gonna all practice it together. So I want everybody to just put your feet on the floor. Maybe just tap your feet a little bit just to feel your feet touch the floor. We're going to move our bodies, just do a little stretch, just to feel like we have bodies again. And just take a few slow breaths, just a couple of deep breaths. And I'm going to paint a little mental picture for you. And as I'm doing that, I want you to pay attention to your body and what happens inside you. And we'll go to the next slide now. So just to paint a little scenario, a little visual picture for you. So paying attention to your body. In March 2020, as we all know, we all went home and we stayed there for a long while. And you had to figure out how to do everything from home, including your work, maybe online school if you have kids, figuring out how to maintain your family and your friend connections, and all the other things that you had to try and figure out how to do from home. And you got into a bit of a rhythm with it. And frankly, you got pretty used to working at home and the balance that it provided you. And these days, once in a while, you go into work, maybe once a week or so, and you enjoy the balance of the two. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. And now imagine I'm your boss and I sit you down and I tell you that starting Monday, we're all coming back to work 5 days a week. And you're expected to be here 9 to 5 every day. And you're upset. And you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to get my kids to school? The commute is going to be impossible. I can't do that every single day. Where am I going to park? It costs $25 a day, and that's if I can even find parking. I have no clothes that fit me anymore. Like, how am I going to do this every day? I cannot do this. This is unfair. What the heck? So you're visibly upset. And I, your boss, I notice you're upset. I'm going to say 2 phrases to you. Notice what happens in your body when I say each one of them. I can understand why you'd be upset by the return to work, but I could understand why you'd be upset by the return to work because Okay, here's where I want to hear from you. What did you notice when I said those two similar but different phrases? I can understand why you'd be upset, but I can understand why you'd be upset because what happened? And people can unmute, you can put your hand up, you could put in the chat. The because was validating, okay? An internal shutdown and defensiveness with the first statement, yeah. The but invalidates what I feel. I'm going to see annoyance too. I'm going to assume number one. The but makes me defensive. Yeah, one, defensive, two, you felt seen and heard. Validating for number two. And it's funny because I didn't even say anything after the but or after the because. I literally just said those two words. Yeah, but sounds defensive and not listening to my point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's good.
So we're going to use this lived experience wisdom that we just had. We're going to take what we just learned, that felt sense of but versus because, and we're going to turn that into a skill for when the emotion takes over in the room. Let's go to the next slide. And we're going to use the skill. We call it but to because. This comes from emotion-focused family therapy. It's part of emotion coaching, which is used in a lot of different approaches to psychotherapy. The idea with but to because is that we co-regulate with the other person. What I mean by that is my regulated nervous system connects with your nervous system and helps it to regulate. There's a lot of science to this. Our nervous systems are always talking to each other below the surface. Mine is talking to yours right now, and you don't even know it. I won't get into it. We do trainings on this as well. The hope with the co-regulation is that it can either de-escalate the reaction in someone, the nervous system reaction, or it can prevent it from escalating further. It's going to improve the ability to compromise and collaborate. So if but closes us off and but opens us up, or because opens us up, we're going to use some becauses to help the client regulate. When trauma emotion takes over, the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, that does what we call executive functioning, solves problems, negotiates in good faith, that part shuts down. We cannot think clearly when we're not regulated. Becauses are the gateway to get the whole brain working again. So we're talking about validation. This is what but to because is. And like Shannon said, validation is easy to talk about. It can be really easy to get it to go wrong though, right? So validation is expressing that someone's thoughts, emotions, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, etc., are understandable given the context that we're in. So the reason it's easy for it to go wrong is because we, as the person validating, as humans, we want to kind of gloss over that part. We want to either get back to problem solving, or we want to make the person feel better, or we want to maybe deny or disagree with what they're saying if we don't agree with them. And usually that includes the word but. So as soon as we say but, like your answers have shown, it immediately invalidates everything you've said before it. So I can understand why you don't want to be here, but you've been mandated. I can understand why you don't want to work with this guy, but we need to find a solution. It makes sense that you don't like what's been suggested, but we only have 5 minutes left and I have people in the waiting room. So what we want to do is we want to replace the but with the because. The because forces us to stay in the validation stance a little bit longer, connect a little bit more with the client's experiences, and it makes it more meaningful. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, why? Because the brain needs to be calm and regulated in order to negotiate in good faith or do any clear thinking. Because validation, or becauses, it regulates the emotions, regulates the nervous system, and because it builds trust by giving voice to all the things that are unsaid in the room, all the history of trauma, all the conflicts that have happened before this one, everything, all the traumas, all the experiences that are in the room, it can give voice to that and take the power away from it So it's not leading anymore. Okay, next slide. Okay, your rule of thumb is I want you to do 3 becauses, or really as many as are needed till you start to see signs of regulation. And we do, I say 3 just because because of that tendency that we have to want to move on to like, okay, I gave you a because, and now let's move on. Let's get it over with already. It forces us to kind of just be in validation with somebody until they're regulated. Okay, so 3 becauses or until they're regulated. Signs of regulation looks like you might see them breathing more easily, slower, more rhythmic breaths. You might see more eye contact, not necessarily 100%, but you might see little more glimpses of it. It might start to feel a bit more like a conversation again, where we're responding to each other and we're here and now. You'll see less tension in the muscles. Maybe things were up here and maybe the shoulders come down a little bit and down until they're down. Okay, less tension. They're calm, but they're also alert, right? They're not calm, but shutting down, like totally glazed over, spaced out. They're calm, but alert. Here, a very good sign of regulation is curiosity. Curiosity means this part of your brain is working. So asking questions. What was that thing that you said again? Can you describe that to me? What did they say? Can you tell me more about that? Those are really good signs that the person has come back to regulation. And other emotions, right? Maybe it started with big anger and then it's turning into tears and they're talking about their fears. So seeing other emotions might feel like, whoa, what did I just open? That's the regulation in process, okay? At the end of the day, I want you to trust your nervous system. If you're regulated, your nervous system's gonna know if they're regulated. Okay, let's practice. Let's go to the next slide. This is where we're gonna work together to practice the skill. And you can put it in the chat or you can say it out loud. I would love to hear your voices, although I know that it can feel a little daunting to do so. Listen to me say this statement and let's come up with some things together to try and see what that might look like. So maybe you're in a mediation room and the client is like, I can't do this, forget it. This is impossible. This is never gonna work. I'm out of here. Okay, what would be some buts? I can understand why you would want to leave, but give me some buts.
But this is the way it works.
But this is the way it works. But this is mandated. Yeah. I want more buts. But yeah, but you have to stay. It's for the children, right? We want to help. But we need to sort this out. But this is important for you and your family. But we need to discuss this. Yes, I love these buts. You guys are so great. Yeah, I think we're close to figuring this out. Yeah, we want to encourage, we want to be there. And see how easy it is to let the buts get in the way of our good intentions, right? Yeah, but we came here today to sort this out. And listen, sometimes judgments come up too, but you're the one who's being unreasonable here, right? Like it's natural. We are gonna have the butts rolling through our head nonstop. This is our go-to. It's so easy to generate all these butts. This will give you closure. Yeah. Oh, so many great butts. Amazing. I don't mean it that way. Okay. Let's practice some becauses. I can't do this. This is impossible. This is never going to work. I am out of here. Before we do any becauses, let's take a breath. Let's regulate. Okay. I could understand why you would want to leave because
this is not easy to do.
This is not easy. It feels impossible because this is really hard. It's really hard to be in this space. Yeah. It's challenging to talk about this because you might feel trapped. Being in this room might feel trapped. It feels overwhelming. Yeah. Yeah. What are some becauses? This is because it's hard to rebuild trust. Yes, because relationships have been fractured. Maybe there's relational trauma there, right? Yeah, because these are difficult conversations And it's scary to express how you're feeling. I love it. Talking about emotions, right? And it's simple, right? Just these little phrases. And it feels like this will never end. Oh, these are beautiful becauses. What are some becauses that would speak to some of the trauma that might be in the room? Yeah, because you want to shelter the kids from more conflict. Yeah. Because of who I represent. Yeah.
That's the systems trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been in this room before and it's not gone well for you. Yeah. And you've seen what can happen when it doesn't go well and it doesn't feel good and it's downright scary. Yeah. Or the conflict itself trauma, right? Because you've tried to, it feels impossible because you've tried to resolve this conflict 1,000 times before today and not been successful. Feels hopeless. And right, and we can say, when we say feels versus this is hopeless, it feels validating without necessarily agreeing with like the fact that this is impossible. Yeah. Oh, because we might not have felt supported or understood. Oh, I love you. These are beautiful becauses.
Can I play with you just for a quick sec?
Yeah.
So sometimes when I'll say to a client, hey, it feels hopeless, and they go, no, it is hopeless,
Mm,
right? That sense, and I don't know, maybe we can workshop together. What might you say
yeah.
to the client? Like, no, it's not. It doesn't feel that way. It is hopeless.
Yeah. Feels like there's no way out. From where you're sitting right now, you don't
Yeah.
see a way out.
Yeah.
You don't see a way forward. And it's really scary. Right? Whew, and that's hard to do, right? To sit in someone's hopelessness and helplessness. Whoo, talk about want to regulate yourself afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially with a minute left. And you're like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. With 5 minutes left before the next people are in the waiting room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quickly. What are your thoughts? Well, I was going to go through the variations on the script, but I think that you folks have it. I don't think, yeah. So, any questions? Any thoughts? Any like, maybe not in this circumstance, or like, what if they're blaming me? What questions? Questions. You can just unmute if you want. The variations would be great. Okay, maybe can you put it to the next slide?
We'll be all book together.
Like we author a book together. We would love to.
That's I'm honored by
Yes.
that comment. Thank you. That's very
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the variations sound like, no wonder you, or of course you, or I could get why you, or I could imagine, or when I put myself in your shoes, I could imagine, or it would make sense that you might think, that you might feel, want to, not want to, because.
Mm-hmm.
No wonder you feel this way, because. I could get why you might not want to, because. It's, yeah.
And this is why it's a human skill. It's not just when you're in a professional
Mhm.
capacity that we can do this. This is like in every relationship,
Yes.
this skill. And in fact, practicing it in outside of the professional setting is what will make it more fluid and genuine
Yes.
when you're in
Yeah.
the professional setting.
I do this with my husband who gets dysregulated. I do this with myself, my friend, my lovely friends here, my client, right? Like it's human. It's human to feel. It's human to experience trauma. It's human to have trauma responses.
And when we can tap into our felt understanding and lived experience of that, it helps us generate becauses from a very genuine and authentic and human way, which is for even more regulating.
So we got a comment, why use
Yeah.
could and would? Why not just say it makes sense? You want to get why?
Yes.
Question.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. We want to be tentative, right? We don't want to say like, I understand how you feel, because that's going to incite, no, you don't know what it's like to be me. We want to convey that, God, like, it would make sense that you feel this way. So we just add a little bit more tentative language in the event that Shannon accepted that we could be wrong, right? We could be wrong. Maybe that's not what you're feeling, right? So, but thank you for bringing that up, because this is where the nuance of the words can make it land or not land. Yeah,
Yeah.
could is a great word. Yes.
And
Says
just
be
in the final
careful.
minute, sorry.
Right.
Just in the
There-
final minutes, just Julie, sorry, I interrupted you. I'll direct, we can resolve this conflict later, Justine. Tell us about this, how important the spirit is over the
Right.
kind of the language, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So we can go to the summary. I think there we have 2 slides ahead,
yeah.
and I'll speak to that there in our final 2 minutes. Yep. The next slide up. No, we got one more after this in summary slide. There we go. Number 1, like, assume trauma's here. Trauma's in the room for every single one of us, in every single room. Assume it's here. Regulate yourself first. Take a breath, right? Then use the skill. It's going to help you. Acknowledge the various sources of trauma in your becauses, right? You practice that system trauma, like the complex trauma, relational trauma, all the different traumas that come up. And use the but to because verbatim, right? I gave you some good shorthands to help you practice and script it out. Find your own style, right? The spirit of but to because is more important than the letter. So the more you use it, the more it'll flow in your own personal style of how you speak. So you don't have to be like, I could understand why you, because. That helps you build your own language. So we really encourage you to practice it and build your own language. Find your own style with it. And validation regulates. In fact, validation can and does heal trauma. So while that is not necessarily the goal for anybody in this room to heal somebody's trauma, it might be an outcome. So just try it out, see what happens, practice it. I think we're at 4:15.
Yeah.
If you have any further questions, reach out to us. Our
Yeah.
contact information is on all of the conference material. We'd be happy to chat more with you about this, or explore any of these ideas further.
Thank you very much, ladies. Shannon, Justin, and Julie, you're a great team. You're smooth. You did a really great job. It was user-friendly ideas, like they're going to be, I can use with my clients, I can use them myself, so that's really good. And it hopefully improve communication in all ways of life. So I really appreciate, and I think everybody really enjoyed it. You kept us here, and it was very interesting. So thank you, because at the end of the day is the hardest act, right? And you did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you for staying